Good morning and welcome to the sixth meeting in public of the 2014 of the European External Relations Committee. Can I make the usual request that mobile phones are switched off, please? They interfere with broadcasting. Can I welcome once again Dan Keneally, Dr Dan Keneally, who is our advisor to the committee on our inquiry. And we have received apologies from Hanzala Malik, and in Hanzala's place today is Neil Bibby. Welcome back again to committee, Mr Bibby. And can we welcome to committee for the first time Alex Rowley, MSP, who has just joined the committee. We wish you the best. You're coming in the middle of an inquiry, but we wish you the best, and hopefully we can give you any help and support you need. The clerks are excellent, so refer to their wisdom at all times. Can I ask you to declare any relevant interest, Mr Rowley?
Thank you for your welcome, convener, and I would refer to the declaration of interest that will be submitted to the Parliament later today.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is our inquiry proposals, Scottish Government proposals for an independent Scotland and its membership of the European Union. It is the main item on our agenda today, and we have members of the House of the Oireachtas, the Joint Committee of European Union Affairs, who will be given evidence by video link. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We have with us today Dara Murphy, who is the TD and the Vice Chair of the committee, Timmy Dooley, TD, Eric Byrne, TD, and Sean Crowe, TD. And could I ask Mr Murphy if I think you're going to make an opening statement, and if all of, just for the matter of our official report here, if all of your colleagues could introduce themselves as well, please. Mr Murphy.
Okay, we'll start with the introductions. To my right.
I'm Sean Crowe. I'm a TD for Dublin South West. I represent Sinn Féin in the Irish Parliament.
To my far left.
I'm Timmy Dooley. I'm a Fianna Fáil TD for County Clare on the west of Ireland, beautiful west of Ireland that hosts the Cliffs of Moher and indeed many tourism facilities there for you to come and visit if you so wish at any stage.
And my name is Eric Byrne. I'm a member of the Labour Party, which is a coalition partner of my colleague here, Dara Murphy's party.
Okay, Madam Convener, my name is Darragh Murphy. I'm from the even more beautiful county of Cork in the south. And I'm a member of the Fine Gael party, the senior party in government. And I'm pleased to make my opening comments just to say that we welcome this morning, and we wish you all very well in Scotland. When this meeting, of course, was arranged, we weren't in the same European Championship group, so I hope we can be as civil to each other as possible. I know we have a couple of big football matches to engage with. On behalf of our committee, the Oireachtas Joint Committee on European Affairs, I'd like to thank you for your invitation this morning. At the outset, I want to stress that we are engaging with you today to discuss Ireland's experience in the European Union. And of course, we don't want to interfere in any way in the domestic debate that is taking place in Scotland in advance of your referendum, which takes place next September. Of course, it's entirely a matter for the people of Scotland to decide upon. As I said, I'm Vice Chair of our Joint Committee, a member of Fine Gael. And we have introduced my colleagues, Deputies Byrne, Deputy Dooley and Deputy Sean Crowe. So you have a representative of each of the four largest political parties, so quite a good cross-section of our Parliament. Our membership in total has 14 deputies and senators, and our role is to consider cross-sectoral, institutional and strategic matters concerning Ireland's membership of the European Union. Since 2011, the Oireachtas has operated a mainstream system whereby 9 sectoral committees are responsible for EU scrutiny on matters that fall within their own various remits. So in terms of Ireland's experience as a small EU member state, and without wanting to preempt your questions or the contributions of my own colleagues, I just want to very briefly make a number of opening points. Ireland's experience as an EU member state has been overwhelmingly positive. Ireland has taken a constructive approach to EU engagement since our accession in 1973. Membership of the European Union has given Ireland a presence at the top table in Europe, and enhanced rather than diminished our sovereignty. And membership is critical to the achievement of foreign and domestic policy objectives and the prosperity, indeed, of the Irish people. The role of the Commission and the community method is important for smaller member states, and where the Commission is sidelined smaller member states, smaller states such as our own tend to suffer. Public perception of the European Union is generally very positive in Ireland. However, I think it's fair to say that confidence did decline somewhat during the economic crisis and the bailout. Communicating Europe is, of course, an ongoing challenge, as is all forms of politics, and in particular because Ireland is constitutionally required to hold referendums on major European Union treaties. As a member of the euro area, Ireland has a keen interest in the application of how new rules around economic governance binding those that share the common currency. And during the crisis, I think the euro itself was not seen as the problem, rather other economic matters. So Ireland exited the bailout. We were in a bailout programme, as I'm sure you're aware, and following our successful presidency of the Council for the first half of 2013, I think it's fair to say we have helped restore a reputation within Europe. When we entered the EEC, as it was then in 1973, we were largely concerned with agriculture and structural funding. And while agriculture remains very important in an Irish context, Irish priorities today include the single market for goods and services, and also the single market for research, innovation, and also enlargement policy generally. Finally, the Oireachtas EU scrutiny system, the Oireachtas is the term for both of our Houses of Parliament, is a work in progress. We have significantly improved EU scrutiny, but far more work can be done. Our committee engages in a worthwhile inter-parliamentary cooperation with other members of EU committees and national parliaments across the European Union, including EU committees of the House of Commons and indeed the House of Lords. A debate on democratic legitimacy in the EU and the role of national parliaments is very much taking place at the moment within Europe, and we would see that national parliaments can play a more positive role in the EU in the future and help indeed to build a bridge between the citizen and the EU. Ourselves and the United Kingdom share many views on EU issues. The view in political and official circles in Ireland would be that the UK, the United Kingdom, is good for the European Union, and indeed that the European Union is also good for the United Kingdom. So we look forward to your questions. Just, Madam Convener, if you could just let me know if you want to ask individually or if you're going to make a statement yourselves, but I'll hand back to your good self now.
We tend to ask direct questions of the panel, and just whatever member of the panel would like to contribute, then we are happy to just allow that to happen, much preferring a sort of a free flow of information rather than stunting it in that way. But I'm going to open first, you'll not be surprised, with a question. And it was taking me back to one of the earliest comments you made in your statement, and thank you very much for your statement. It was very informative indeed, and you've no doubt answered some of the questions that I had on my list, I have to say. But given that Ireland celebrated 40 years in the EU last year, and given your statement where you said that Ireland's membership of the EU enhanced rather than diminished your sovereignty, can you tell me the impact that being a member of the EU has had on Ireland within the rest of the world?
Well, are you happy that I will take that first, and then I bring in my colleagues? I mean, I think it's fair to say that before our membership of the European Union, many parts of Irish life, were underdeveloped, particularly the economy. So our membership allowed us really to avail of structural funding, access to markets, And in that regard, I suppose, as a developing economy, we were able to grow. Our GDP at that stage, I think, was about a quarter of the European GDP per person was about a quarter of the European average. Now we have moved, to above or at the European average at least. And I suppose in that context, it allowed a country that had only been at that stage, I suppose, 40 or 50 years to grow in many areas right across all the sectors in Irish life. But Timmy, would you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think Vice Chair makes some very valid comments in relation to the way it has strengthened our economy generally, initially by way of financial support. That was really, I suppose, about ensuring that we participated on a level playing pitch with our European partners. And that was welcome and helpful, particularly in relation to structural funds, cohesion funds. That bell in the background relates to our Senate, by the way, so if that's disturbing you there, you can ignore it, it'll stop shortly. That was very much part of the economic development side, and then allowed us, or put us in a position to compete more equally, if you want, to access European markets. But we've moved beyond that phase now, and we see ourselves entering a phase of where we will be net contributors to the European Union. And we see that as important because it's about broadening and strengthening the Union as a whole, thereby giving other citizens of the member states that joined more laterally the same access to the benefits that we have succeeded in achieving. And a growing and a strengthening European Union with its 500 million odd citizens benefits everybody. But we've made social gains as well. Much of the changes in our labour law, the notion of equal pay for equal status between men and women, much of that emanated from European directives and changes to our labour law generally. So I suppose working more closely with member states has allowed us to benefit from changes and from experience that they have had. We wouldn't have been seen as an industrial nation. So therefore we were perhaps a little bit behind in terms of our thinking in that regard. But all the issues that flow from that have already been experienced by our partners in Europe. So it's a little bit like you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you reach an impasse on particular issues. You look around amongst your partners in Europe and you say, well, what's best practice? And obviously we've benefited from that. I suppose where we've all experienced the crisis has been with the euro and the issues around banking over the last couple of years. But I think collectively we'll find a solution to that I think will ultimately benefit the next generation and the next wave of member states that join the Union. Thank you.
Eric?
Can I just give some additional comments? If you remember Ireland in the 73 and you compare it with Ireland 40 years later, there's just no comparison. It's important to remember, I would argue, from the Labour Party's point of view, that in fact European thinking and development was way ahead of the national thinking on many issues of social, mainly social issues. We were in 73 we were very, very backward vis-a-vis the progressive thinking of European members. As a nation, our infrastructure was very weak, and thanks to the regional development funds, we have the most fantastic interlinking road network throughout the country, which has been contributed by our European partners through the regional development funds. And then, of course, as I mentioned, labour laws, the role of women in society. We were in 73. We were a very conservative Catholic country. The social agenda of Europe was very much in advance of that of Ireland. And of course the European Social Fund helped us in many, many ways. It also liberated to a very large degree women who were trapped in a traditional role of housewife, conditioned by Irish society and the church. So it was a liberating 40 years. And of course the benefits today, you mentioned that we're 40 years in the European Union, but we've also managed 7 presidencies of the Council. So we've a lot of experience as a small country. In fact, it's fascinating to note, and this is sort of a sense of great pride for me as a member of the Labour Party, that this year, our last presidency was internationally acclaimed as a very, very, very fine leadership role within Europe, and the progression that we made in assisting other countries to evolve and develop and strengthened our partnership with Europe. So look, in conclusion, one has to think back to 73, compare it with Ireland today, and then I suppose we can be thankful to Europe for the assisted bailout. It wasn't Europe that sabotaged our economy, it was done domestically in a sense, and those who came to our rescue was the our European friends. We've managed to get out of that bailout now, and we're looking forward to a very, very healthy economic development in the next number of years. So the best of luck to you in your deliberations. I would understand it's not going to be easy. But we're not here to interfere with the decisions that you make, but we're here to engage with you to maybe exchange ideas. Thank you.
Can I come in? Yeah. Again, for me to give a different view of Irish history in relation to 40 years ago. I was a relatively young person at that time, but I remember when the debates around the joining the EEC were pro and anti at that time. And I suppose the concerns were, at that time in Ireland, we were linked to, you had the Irish pound and you had the pound in the north. The conflict going on in the island of Ireland. Yes, the country is a different place 40 years down the road. But there was a lot of concerns expressed at that time. Yes, the big push in relation to the negotiations was around agriculture. But we had a potentially huge fishing industry, which wasn't developed. We had fish off our shores, we had, it was a huge potential there in relation to that. And there was a lot of concern at that time in relation to that, that we would lose out. And we lost out in those negotiations, and we're still paying the price of that today in relation to that. Everyone else seems to be able to fish our waters, but the Irish fleet has shrunk in relation to that. There is a view that, yes, huge positive gains in relation to what's come out of the European Union, yes, around women's rights, around social issues and so on. But there has been negatives in relation to that. We have ceded some of our sovereignty. There's no denial, Lisbon and the other treaties, Maastricht and so on. There's a succession of treaties there that were ceding power, from the local government, the government here in Ireland, to the EU itself. And that pattern has continued right up to this day. There was a concern, and there still is a concern about the direction that Europe was going. James Connolly, great Irishman, great Scotsman in relation to, he talked in terms of the Europe that he wanted to see was a federation of free peoples. And I think that's the view that would, most people common right across Europe would actually have that view. But I think in all countries, large and small, there's concern about the direction that, the power being centralised in relation to. There's certainly, and we'll probably go into these discussions later on, but there's certainly concerns right across Europe in relation to the role of Europe within the crisis itself. Have they helped out? Has that solidarity, that European solidarity that we all talk about, has that been there for smaller countries and those in need and those in difficulty at the moment? I would argue that no, they haven't stepped up to the plate. And I was in Madrid at the weekend there, talking to people, 40% unemployment. No real urgency coming from Europe in relation to that. So I wish you well in your debate here today. But, there's been huge positive gains for Ireland in relation to the EU. We've also ceded some sovereignty, and there has been negatives in relation to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answers there, covering a range of issues. And I think I've got many members of this committee who would want to come in on all of that. But I think maybe the key element I've taken from your contribution is the positives of your membership of the European Union, but also the forgotten aspects of it, of the social impact of the European Union. Certainly, we've benefited from equal pay and all of the other issues, but we tend to not debate those as much as we should, and we really really should. I'm going to open to committee members, and when doing that, if committee members could maybe say who they are for the benefit of our Irish colleagues, so that they know who you are and where you're from, and given that they've determined which party each of them are from, if we can determine your party as well, so that we can show that we are just as much a cross-party group as well. And I've got Claire Adamson first.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'm Claire Adamson. I'm an SNP Central Region List member of the Parliament. Thank you very much for your opening statements, and it was very interesting to hear about the engagement in the EU that Ireland has and your successful presidencies. Indeed, many of the witnesses who have come before us have cited Ireland as an excellent example of a small country who has made the most of building relationships across Europe. And I know that you have been expanding your embassies. You most recently opened an embassy in Croatia, the newest member of the EU. And I also have a plan to have a presence in every European capital. So just wondered if you could explain to us how important that strategy has been and what the benefits to Ireland have been of that engagement.
Yeah, I might take this because I have to leave to speak in Parliament in about 5 minutes. I think it has been a very effective strategy to try to have a presence in as many member states as possible, because as well as the benefits that we've talked about, both social and economic, in terms of strengthening our own infrastructure at home, we really see Europe as a market for the goods we produce. If you look, for example, at our agricultural produce, which we're a green island, we produce a lot of food which is sold throughout Europe. Over 80% of everything we produce from the agricultural sector is exported. And an integral part of our missions in other member states, alongside the diplomats, if you want, from our Foreign Affairs Department, usually sit people from our development agencies, our economic development agencies, the agency that assists Irish companies in terms of improving the quality of what they produce and assisting in accessing and selling into the markets that are Europe. So we see it as vital that we have a presence there, over and above just the standard diplomacy, that we have active engagement with the marketplace. And from that point of view, I believe that the spread of the missions across the Union is such an important part to assist our corporates, if you want, in developing and engaging and understanding the marketplace, which, as you know, changes quite quickly, and therefore you need that presence and you need that engagement. And that has benefited, I think, and will continue to benefit us, particularly on the food side. As we have identified, the population across Europe is growing. The consumption of the kind of products that we produce, both meat and dairy, is growing. And as a result of that engagement, we've developed a strategy here in Ireland. It's about Harvest 2020. It's a strategy to increase our production to a significant level to meet that expected increased demand in consumption of food across Europe. Thank you.
Could I also comment on the Croatian embassy decision? Look, there's 28 members of the Union now, and our government is determined to, notwithstanding the closure of a number of embassies in the recent past, not least of which was the Holy See, which is going to reopen. But we do recognise that we must have a strong presence in each of the 27 countries. The role of a small country in Europe is an issue that the Scots want to debate also, and it's important to point out, I would say, that politics is about forming allegiances and alliances with your friends. We use very effectively our diplomatic presence in each of the 27 countries, and of course you'll understand that within Brussels itself we have the permanent reps, which is basically the ambassadors and a huge successful team who are liaising between the National Parliament, our MEPs and other countries. There's huge interlinked debates going on there. So diplomacy and trade go hand in hand. When our embassies now concentrate very largely, not just on the issuing of visas and the issuing of passports or whatever, we concentrate hugely on trade issues. Hence the I think it would be argued in Ireland that our bailout has been achieved effectively through the enhancement of the image of Ireland through our diplomatic services throughout Europe, and I think the trade links that we are developing from that. So diplomacy and trade, yes, we do see that there are occasions when you can form alliances with smaller countries, and most of the countries are much smaller than the French, the German, the British, and the English, and the Spanish. So that's it.
No, we let them back in now. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to take my leave. Wish you well with your deliberations. I'm just speaking on Ireland's engagement with the European Union in the main Parliament next. So, best of luck with all your efforts in that regard.
Thank you for your evidence and good luck in your speech.
Thank you.
Do you need to come back in?
Now back to you.
No, yep. Their next member is Jamie McGregor.
Jamie McGregor, MSP for Highlands and Islands for the Scottish Conservatives. On a clear day, I can see Ireland from Argyll. And it always looks much better weather over there too, I have to say. We know that how well Ireland has done out of the EU in terms of 17 billion of structural and cohesion funds and 44 billion from the Common Agricultural Policy. And we know about the excellence of your agricultural products and the expertise you have in marketing those. And everything looked rosy in the garden in Ireland. And then suddenly the financial crisis came along and you were hit by, you had to be involved in a 67.5 billion rescue package. Now, I suppose my question to you, therefore, there's a lot of talk at the moment about what currency an independent Scotland would use. And my question to you is, do you consider that having to use the euro from Ireland's point of view was the major part of the inflexibility of the euro was the major part of the crisis that was caused in Ireland?
No. The major part, by a large margin, was we had a banking crisis. We had a property bubble that was fueled by an inflationary economy, and when the bubble burst, the bankrupt banks, their losses were taken effectively onto the shoulders of the sovereign, for a variety of reasons, including, I suppose, negotiations with our EU partners, and what ultimately ended up being the bailout grouping of the Troika, the IMF, the Commission, and the European Central Bank. So what happened in Ireland, I think it's fair to say, would have happened irrespective of the currency. How we dealt with it subsequently, given our lack of independence, I suppose, in terms of devaluing or revaluing our currency, you could argue that perhaps had a short-term potential impact or benefit that we weren't able to accrue towards ourselves. On the other side of that argument, of course, you have to balance that by being members of the currency. There was a greater onus on the other members of the currency to not allow contagion from Ireland spread into other member states that share the euro. Now, we would, of course, argue that Europe still has a long journey to travel in that regard. We are looking for retrospective bail-in from Europe for the monies that effectively were put in place to secure one very large bank, very, very large bank in an Irish context, and a reasonably large bank in a European context. But to answer your question, I think it would be overly simplistic to suggest that the euro was any part of the problem or a significant part. The one area, of course, where the single currency has been charged as being part of the problem was the whole area of very low interest rates across the European Union. The Irish economy was performing much stronger than other parts of Europe, and so monetary policy around Europe had very low interest rates. That meant there was and this didn't just happen in Ireland, it also happened in Spain and Portugal, where money was being sucked from the core into the peripheral regions. Very cheap money was available, and that gave rise to inflation and property prices rising. And again, I suppose if any state had their own currency in that regard, interest rates could have been dampened down. And my colleague has left us from, they were in government at the time. I suppose that there were still measures that could have been taken in Ireland, better banking regulation and so on and so forth. But to give you a one-word answer to your question, Mr. McGregor, the answer is no, the euro really wasn't at the core of our problems.
It did, to some extent, there was a lack of manoeuvrability in relation to, because we were tied to the euro, that there wasn't that greater flexibility there in relation to, for instance, that we couldn't print more money, or we couldn't take steps to people were looking at the bigger picture in relation to the euro, not just the Irish situation. But the crisis was caused by, there was a lack of oversight there. The European Central Bank had a huge role in relation to their lack of oversight in relation to what was going on. There was money coming in from the German banks, from French investors, all the big powers throughout Europe in relation to it. Ireland was left, the crisis came about, Ireland was left holding the baby in relation to it. And people were talking about, we don't want this to spread to other banks and other systems and so on. So the Irish taxpayer were left with this private debt, a public debt and a private debt, and we're still paying for that to this day. And that's where I talk in terms of the lack of solidarity in that we propped up the banking system to a large extent in Europe by the measures that the Irish people took, the Irish taxpayers took. But there's been no sort of reciprocation in relation to, helping Ireland in relation to separate that private and sovereign debt in relation to. So if we were outside the euro, would things have changed? It probably wouldn't, because of the size of Ireland, the nature of the economy itself. People are looking at other areas around the world, the Icelands and other countries in relation to what they did and their response in relation to it. They took measures that that moved them further up the road than we are in at the moment in relation to that. And again, people would probably cite the fact that they were outside the euro, or outside, that they had greater flexibility in their own finances and how they would control their own economy in relation to it. But I think there's been negatives and positives in relation to that. But I don't, genuinely, I don't believe that if we had the Irish pound, there was some suggestion that we could have adapted in relation to that. But I think I would err on caution in relation to that. I think that's fantasy stuff. I don't think we realistically, we would have been still in a huge difficult situation.
Can I just say, Mr. McGregor, that yes, what I appreciate is your own business as to where you place yourself vis-a-vis your currency. Just to remind you, we had the Irish punt. We transferred from the Irish punt, not from the sterling region, into the euro. But having said that, I think it's important to note that we would have been very conscious of the weak economic growth within Europe. Our crisis came partly, probably the majority of the difficulties we had to face was political and banking ineptness here in Ireland. It wasn't the cause of the euro or our membership of the euro. It was because of the oversight of banking, the ability of banks to draw down cheap money and to disperse that cheap money to every Tom, Dick and Harry, even people, as you know, the subprime lenders. Everybody was drawing money. People who hadn't a hope of ever making the repayments. That was because of the weakness of the oversight of the banking institutions. It was aided and abetted in Ireland by the political ineptitude of the outgoing government, and we're paying an expensive. The people of Ireland are paying heavily for those mistakes. However, we do have a commitment. I think it was in June of 2 years ago from the leaders of Europe that we haven't given up on our claim to be allowed, in recognising that we got a raw deal in the issue of repaying our debt, that there is to be a separation of the sovereign had to carry the can on behalf of the banks, and I think Europe recognises that maybe they owe us the return of some of our squandered money. We look therefore towards the economic and monetary union debate. We see this as a very important next development, and you'll hear that the debate is about never again allowing the sovereign nations of Europe to have to carry the financial responsibilities of the ineptitude of banks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Willie Coffey next.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, Deputies. My name is Willie Coffey. I'm the member for the constituency of Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley, which is in the beautiful county of Ayrshire, Robert Burns' country. I wanted to let you know also that I know many of your colleagues through my membership of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, and it's a pleasure to speak with you this morning. I wanted to talk to you and ask you your opinions about relationships, particularly Ireland's relationship with the United Kingdom and Ireland's relationship with other small nations in the European Union. Previously, I had spoken with Minister Donoghue about Ireland's relationship with the United Kingdom, and his view was that that relationship was strengthened largely because of Ireland's position within the European Union and its influential position amongst the family of smaller nation states within Europe. Could I have your comments and your views about that, and whether you would agree with that assertion that Ireland's relationship is much improved with the United Kingdom because of your membership of the European Union?
Yes, just to apologise again for my colleague Deputy Crowe, we're actually debating European Union affairs this morning in the Parliament, and obviously they're spokespersons for their parties on those issues, but they hope to come back. Yes, I think it's fair to say that within the European Union, our best relationship is with the United Kingdom, and I think that the reasons for that are many, but we share with the United Kingdom so many objectives, so many targets, and I think on most issues anyway, Ireland and the United Kingdom would share a common position. Why our relationship with the United Kingdom has strengthened, I think that's largely historic, going back to a time, and we all know the history. Whereas when we go into Europe, we go in, I suppose, as equal partners and member states. That having been said, and this is my own observation, that one of the reasons for our closeness to the United Kingdom is, and you have mentioned the smaller states and the blocs and the relationships. We're disadvantaged, I think, in that regard because there are alliances within the EU. There is the Benelux alliance, there are some Eastern alliances, there are to the Northern European alliances, there's the Mediterranean alliance, which we hear a lot now. We have no natural alliance other than with yourselves, which is I think a little bit more informal, but nonetheless very, very strong. There are two types of alliance, I feel, within the European Union. There's some of these small member states that come together either geographically or if they have a shared interest, which we often do with other countries that have a strong agricultural concerns. But then there's our alliance with the United Kingdom based on the fact that they're one of the big 3 or 4 powerhouses within Europe. And I think we all know that often it's the powerful countries carry quite a significant degree of influence within the European Union, and you can argue on the basis of population, rightly so. So I think that is also strengthened, given that we don't disagree in the first place on many issues with the UK. I think it's fair to say that on some issues we have been there with the coattails, are certainly happy to take to allow the United Kingdom to take the lead. So, I think for those reasons and maybe others, I think our relationship with the UK has indeed strengthened, significantly strengthened.
Could I suggest that if you've already spoken to Paschal Donoghue, which you have, who's the Minister in charge of European Affairs, then, superfluous what we might say, because he basically represents our common views. Can I say clearly it's the historic and economic linkages that bond us together, and I suppose it's very important to point out that the relationships between Ireland and England has never ever been stronger than they are today. You will note the visit of Queen Elizabeth to Ireland. She was afforded a most fantastic reception. We are reciprocating, I think, this year with the visit by our President Michael D. Higgins to England. And I think it's probably agreeable by all concerned in the Republic that the relationships have never ever been stronger. And that's very important for us because Britain is our largest trading partner. Our trade links with Britain are phenomenally strong and important to us. So what was the role that the European Union played in helping develop this relationship? But I'm not quite sure we can view it from the European perspective. I think we are adjoining islands. Our linkages have inevitably got to be strengthened, developed, and I think they're at an all-time high at this point in time. And I think both countries can only benefit substantially from this warm relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Just have a brief second question, Convener. Looking forward, of course, Scotland has a big decision to make this September, and I wouldn't ask you for your views about that, of course. But looking further ahead, the United Kingdom may be considering a referendum, and the result of which may be that the United Kingdom may pull out of the European Union altogether. What would your views be if that were to happen in terms of Ireland's relationship with the United Kingdom and possibly, at that point, an independent Scotland?
Well, we're not going to give you a view on what it would be for an independent Scotland, but our government has said publicly that we feel that for the United Kingdom to pull out would be bad for Ireland. And indeed, particularly, I suppose, given our relationship on the border with Northern Ireland, where our joint membership of the European Union between ourselves and the United Kingdom is helpful. It is, of course, a matter for your good selves whether you have a referendum and indeed how you vote. So our position, and to be blunt, it's a selfish position, going back to some of the points I made earlier. We see a Europe with the United Kingdom in it, from an Irish perspective, to be vastly superior to Europe with the United Kingdom on the margins.
Can I say it goes without saying that we would view the notion of England leaving the European Union would be catastrophic, quite frankly, not just for Ireland, but also for Europe. It would be very difficult for us in Ireland to envisage England outside of the European family. Can I say that, our colleague from Sinn Féin mentioned that we were conceding some of our sovereignty. Well, in fact, we do that voluntarily because every treaty change we have to put to our citizens, which is fairly unique in Europe. Every treaty change has to go by way of referendum to the people, and the people engage in this debate very fully and vote according to whatever way they want to vote. The point is that they have voluntarily ceded whatever form of sovereignty that the Sinn Féin member is worried about, and they are doing that voluntarily in a democratic process. Of course, the Tory party in England is only saying that if they get an overall majority in the next election, that they will put a proposal to the people. It is very vague from our point of view as to what exactly, items they will be arguing they want to return to the sovereign from Europe. So it's very vague, and we just have to, I think collectively here in Ireland we would say, look, we would rather they did not pull out of Europe. It would be bad for Ireland, it would be bad for Europe, and you yourselves will have to consider the relationship between Scotland and England if such a thing should happen.
You said it could be catastrophic for Ireland, I think. I mean, could you give a couple of examples of what the impact on Ireland might be if the UK were to pull out of Europe?
But as I say, they are our largest trading partner. We have this policy that Europe is a unity of families, i.e. countries. There's a single market of 800 million people. We view this market as very, very important. If Britain was to break that relationship, we'd have to have bilateral relations with England. It would make Ireland's trading relationship with Europe and England far more complicated, I would argue. Maybe Jared would have a point of view.
I wouldn't say to be catastrophic. I mean, we'll drive on regardless. But I think I'd rather focus on the positive degree of the relationship to date rather than and that continuing. For example, if you look at the regulatory framework we have now within Europe, that's largely, many of the positive elements of that have been driven by the United Kingdom. We both support strongly free trade, and I suppose it's a continuation of a shared ethos that we have in these islands through, I suppose, the strength of the United Kingdom and Ireland working together to continue on the positives. Would be, I suppose, the focus that we would want to have. It remains too much of an unknown to say that there would be A, B, or C specific very negative impacts. But as with all things in public and political life, I suppose it's a matter of combining quite a variety of marginal elements to bring together into a steady progression. So I think that's really where we're coming from, that we have shared values, shared political systems, largely a shared legal system and so on and so forth, much of which we got originally from Great Britain and the United Kingdom. And it's that being diluted, I suppose, is a large part of our fear.
Okay, thank you for that. Gurumila Mahagat.
No, Haberek. Yeah.
Okay, on that, I've got Neil Bibby next. Neil.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, deputies. Thank you for your time. I know you're very busy, so it's much appreciated. Obviously mentioned earlier that Ireland has been a member. I should say my name is Neil Bibby. I'm a Labour Party member for the West Scotland region. Ireland's been a member of the EU for 40 years. Obviously, we're having a debate on the Scottish Government's proposal to be independent of the UK, but to join the EU. For the record, I think we should be a member of both. I also understand from a poll recently that 29% of people in Scotland don't want to be in the EU at all. It was mentioned earlier that people had voluntarily ceded sovereignty to the EU. I just wanted to ask you, what is the degree of support? It was mentioned earlier that it had kind of stalled a bit during the banking crisis, but what is the degree of support in Ireland for membership of the EU? Have there been any polls recently done, and what do they say?
Well, all of us who are politicians, when it suits, ignores polls, and when they're good, we quote them liberally. I suppose, aside from the polls, the fiscal stability referendum or treaty, which put in place the rules under which the so-called austerity programme was put in place, uniquely had to be put to referendum in Ireland. Now, you have to go back to that time. The Troika had come into the country. We had ceded our sovereignty for a period of 3 years while we recovered certain economic targets to this economic monitoring group. And at the same time, we were asking our people to support effectively the same measures in a treaty. Very, very politically sensitive. People were having wages cut. They were seeing many of their services cut back. And yet more than 60%, I think 62%, voted to support these proposals, a proposal from Europe to effectively put a very difficult economic programme onto their own shoulders. We've also had, including the Lisbon Treaty. Now it had to go to the people a second time, but I think it's fair to say that if a referendum were put to the Irish people to leave Europe, first of all, no political party in our parliaments is even suggesting that in any event. Sinn Féin certainly have various concerns, but I don't believe they have any policy that we would leave the European Union. So I think it's fair to say that a very significant, if not the vast majority of people here, while critical of many of the policies, would want us to remain within the EU. Eric, would you?
Well, it's very hard for me to add to that answer, quite frankly. I think we are extremely pro-Europe, right across the political divide. There are no Eurosceptic parties in the Republic. There's no sign of any Eurosceptic party emerging. We are happy to say that the people ultimately decide on the major issues affecting Ireland vis-à-vis our European partners. They partake in these referendums. And a very, very difficult choice had to be made by the Irish people on the fiscal treaty. And they, by a handsome majority, supported the government's position on advocating support, which I think indicates a very, well, I suppose one could be cynical and say, look, there's no alternative, because there is no alternative, and the logic of that is, therefore, that there's no alternative to membership of Europe. So the question really is never posed in the political climate in Ireland of anybody really advocating in a serious way the withdrawal from Europe, because where else is there for us?
Just very briefly to add, and I know we're monopolising your time a small bit, so we will try and ease back and give you more time. I suppose culturally, and this comes from how things are taught maybe in the schools, Ireland is always described as being in Europe. Europe is this big blue place on a map, and we're in it. So we don't necessarily see a competition between our independence and our membership of the European Union.
Thanks for that answer. I just also wanted to ask you about Ireland has opted out of the Schengen area and is a member of the common travel area with the rest of the UK. Do you think if Scotland became independent we should seek to opt out of Schengen and maintain that common travel area with the rest of the UK and Ireland? And what implications do you think that would have for Ireland?
Well, it's I suppose the reason, as I understand it, that we're not in Schengen is that we've got this big landmass between us and Schengen, which is the United Kingdom. So, I mean, what's happened recently with the referendum in Switzerland, the whole area of what they call the four freedoms in Europe of movement of people, goods, and services, etc. Is an ongoing debate. We have free movement already with the United Kingdom. The question, I suppose, isn't so much for any part of these islands. I think we would all have to have the same agreement in practice. That's why we're not, as I understand it, in Schengen. So I think we'd have to move sort of as one in that regard, irrespective of what any one part would choose to do down the line, just from a practical point of view.
Well, yeah, so one would be very worried if there was any complications arising from your position vis-a-vis Schengen. I mean, we work very closely with the British authorities, as you know. We keep changing the rules to facilitate, for example, when Chinese visitors are now they need visas to come to Ireland. So long as your authorities now grant them a visa, they can automatically travel from England to Ireland. That was a very recent development. They used to come in illegally through Northern Ireland because they could move from England to Northern Ireland and then illegally down through the unmanned border. So for us, our relationship with the British authorities is very, very important about the freedom of movement. We don't need passports to travel from Ireland to England or vice versa. In fact, we have the largest non-Irish population in the Republic is actually the British. They constitute by far the largest number of non-Irish. So we would hate to see any complications arising with your Scottish debate about Schengen and about borders and being in or out of Europe or being independent and the consequence of that.
Okay, Rod Campbell.
Morning, my name is Rod Campbell. I'm SNP member of the Scottish Parliament for North East Fife, very beautiful North East Fife, home of golf at St Andrews. Can I just briefly before I go on to something else, just ask you on the last point on Schengen, the common travel area, would I be correct in assuming that nobody in Ireland would object to the continuation of a common travel area with an independent Scotland?
Well, I mean, that's a hypothetical kind of question, as you know. I mean, it's a matter for ye in ongoing negotiations, that ye would have, whether or not people would object or not. It's not for me to say. It's not for us really to comment. I mean, that's part of your own internal debate around that at the moment. And it's unknown as to what the outcome of it would be.
It's very difficult to comment really, because it's a hypothetical question, as pointed out. But then you've got your own. You'll have to come to your own relationship with Northern Ireland, which, as you know, is part of the British.
No, I was thinking more in terms of the opinion from the Republic of Ireland. You wouldn't want to see a disruption to easy travel arrangements between the Republic and Scotland.
Well, we wouldn't want to see really, and again, you can one can sound kind of selfish in how things are put, but we wouldn't want to see a disruption between free movement of any part of whether it's Northern Ireland or the UK or indeed Europe itself. So yeah, you can take it from that point of view. We wouldn't want to see any further disruption. It seems to me to work very well as it is at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. We can move on. We've heard evidence in this committee about the need for small states to prioritise. I wonder if you could just expand on your experience over the last 40 years on that, and whether you agree that small states need to prioritise, and what particular successes has Ireland had in negotiations.
Agriculture.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes. First of all, the answer is small states do need, of course, to prioritise. Large states, in fact, I think need to prioritise, but perhaps to a lesser extent. The historic area, I think, would be agriculture, of course, and then on structural funding. The reality for this part of the world, and by this part of the world I would include all of the United Kingdom and Ireland, is we are now moving to a point where the northern European countries will be net contributors to Europe generally. So money will and we welcome this, because it means that it's a sign of economic strength to a certain extent. So I suppose to that extent, it's natural that creditor countries will focus on other areas. I think the focus for us now, as a very open small economy with a large trading relationship with America, is the area of the TTIP, the transatlantic trade agreement, which is very important for us. And also, I suppose that we would see a greater amount of European money put into research and development, where Europe is falling behind other areas. But in order, to achieve, I suppose, you're far better targeting a couple of areas. I mean, recently the CAP negotiations as part of the broader European budgetary talks certainly would have been prioritised by us, and I think we would feel that we got quite a good outcome out of that.
At the moment, you'll be very aware of the huge numbers of unemployed people throughout Europe. It's been mentioned earlier on. The social agenda of Europe is very, very important, and we do put a lot of effort into prioritising our position on and support for example, the Youth Employment Project of Europe. We are very, very keen to see that there are incentives, of which there are, and funding being made available to create employment for the long-term unemployed and particularly youth throughout Europe.
Mr. Murphy
will be leading. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, okay. Mr. Murphy, you talked about the recent CAP deal. From that this, the fact that you're a small state didn't prevent you getting a deal, which you obviously seemed happy with.
It didn't prevent us. Now, it's possible some of our farming unions and that, and maybe the opposition would argue we could have done a better deal, but that's maybe in the nature of politics itself. Again, I think in that example, there were strategic alliances made through the negotiations. I think that's quite commonly known, and other countries, you know, that had agricultural objectives, you know, came together. In fact, it is one of the areas, one of the very, very few areas, I think, where Ireland and the UK don't share a position, is on the broader agricultural policy area. Being a smaller country, you can argue that either way depending on your political perspective. But certainly, I think that the criticism of the deal was very mooted here, which leads me to believe that it was broadly accepted as about the best that we could manage.
Thank you.
Okay, we're quickly running out of time, and I know that you've got a busy schedule and we've got a busy schedule. I've got two very quick supplementaries on the CAP point, the Common Agriculture. One from Claire Adamson and one from Jamie. So if I could ask both of you to ask your question to our Irish colleagues, and then we can get the answers to both those questions. Claire.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, we've all come through the recent CAP negotiations, and the uplift, the Pillar 2 uplift, was awarded to the UK because of the low productivity in Scotland. But despite that, Scotland only received 18% of the money for that, which means Scotland remains the lowest EU per hectare at €12 per hectare payment, and that compares with Ireland's of £69 per hectare, with Ireland having secured the £1,946 million that you did get. I just want to ask you, what competitive advantage does that give Irish farmers, and how important is it to your plans for Harvest 2020?
Could we get Jamie's question next?
My
and
question
you can answer both, yeah?
Yes. My question is, in fact, on I see Scotland's advantage in the fact that it has, on votes for the Council of Ministers, the UK has 29 votes. And I noticed that Ireland has 7, and I imagine that Scotland, with more or less the same population, would have about 7 as well if that was independent. I believe that that Scotland benefits from its position in the UK by having the value of these 29 votes at the Council of Ministers. How does Ireland maximise its 7 votes in order to get what it wants?
Well, to take the first question first, you know, the money that's coming in through the Common Agricultural Policy and the deal that was done, I'm honestly not fully aware of the deal of the UK's deal. It is with respect to 2020 though. The view here is that these subsidies are pretty much short-lived now. As Europe continues to move into as demand for agricultural policy, particularly our milk and other products, that really farming over the next 20-30 years, you know, will have to more or less stand on its own 2 feet, and that the total quantum of money that will be coming in to countries like Ireland will reduce over time. So I also feel that perhaps while you look at those figures, you can see quite a large difference. It has to be taken also into consideration the economic positions of both countries, and often in these negotiations, it's looked at as a country's envelope of money rather than just where it goes subsequently can be within that envelope. The question of the voting power and how that's broken up and how it's quite difficult to form allegiances for small countries because there are so many different inputs and generally relationships don't, in my experience, break down between all the small countries against the big ones. The United Kingdom's strong voting bloc, I think, might be too strong a word to say we're jealous of it, but it is unquestionably a fact of life that the larger voting blocs allow greater influence. But again, that's down to population, but I think when they're used well, I think that can be to the benefit of the bigger countries. And that's broadly democratic, and I think as it should be.
Well, you notice I don't say an awful lot on the common agricultural policy because I'm an urban. I represent a working class constituency in the capital, and we would share some of the common views that are shared that maybe agriculture is getting too much subsidy. However, because we're united around the table here, we're not going to criticise the benefits of the farming community, except to say that it would probably be fair to say that Ireland, as a small country, benefits very largely by the position of the French on agricultural issues. I think Dara is quite right. If you look at the intensification, the capital intensification of the factories that are being currently built in Ireland because of the lifting of the milk quotas, we are targeting and we are in a prime position to maximise the agricultural base that exists in Ireland for very extensive exports of food produce, dairy produce. The Chinese market is vast. We've had Xi Jinping here in Ireland looking at our agricultural produce. It's one of the real areas of potential serious growth, and I'm happy to applaud that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've actually now completely run out of time and certainly went over the time that we anticipated. Can I extend our gratitude from this committee to your committee for taking part in our deliberations and inquiry? If you could extend that gratitude to both Mr Dooley and Mr Crowe as well. We thank you very much, and hopefully this will not be the last time that we collaborate on any work that we're doing jointly across any of the areas that we find important and worth scrutiny. Just to finish with, thank you very much, and we really appreciate the time that you've given us this morning. Thank you. Okay, I'll now suspend very briefly to go into private session.